I'm John Medlinger, and I own Superior Hardwoods of Montana. And we've been dealing in hardwood flooring and recycled or reclaimed hardwood flooring, for the last 30 years. And I met Tommy 1998.
Yeah, probably a little bit before that, actually.
Before that.
Yeah.
I started buying recycled woods just prior to my fire in '95. Bought an old Apple warehouse in Lola, Montana. That was basically all ponderosa pine and some fir.
My name's Tommy Sancic. I own Oldwood Limited. It was started in 1997 in Doylestown, Ohio. And it's since then become one of the leaders in the reclaimed flooring business. In the beginning stages, when I was driving around with my dad in his $300 pickup truck covering the mountains, and he was talking to you about selling you material and lumber, I think I was probably about 14, maybe 15 years old. I can't remember exactly, but I was pretty young. Do you remember that?
Yeah, you were a young man following your dad.
Yeah. And so my dad was a salvager, a barn dismantler. He sold bricks, he sold stone, he sold anything he could get his hands on to hustle. And I believe that's when you guys met. I think it was 94 or 95, because I was not old enough to drive a pickup truck or a car. And that would have been 94 at the time. And we ran an ad when I was a kid. We found out barnwood had a use, and we ran an ad in a Western magazine, and it was a picture of me. The ad was holding a big board, and it said "The Old Wood Guy." Do you remember that ad?
Yeah, vaguely I do.
Yeah. And I believe, if my memory serves me right, which I can't remember a lot of things, but I do remember that, that's where we had come in contact with Superior Hardwoods.
That's correct.
Yeah. So I was very young at that, in the early stages of reclaiming old barns and buildings and stuff like that. And then, as the years went by, I decided to, want to make flooring and separate myself from the in and outs of my father and antiques and selling cars and school buses and anything he can buy and sell. I wanted to be strategic on one specific item and sell it. So that's when I started Oldwood Limited at 17 years old. I moved out of the house. $20 laundry basket. And I believe at that time I only knew you in the industry as a buyer from the previous years of knowing you working with my dad. At 18 years old, I went and tore a barn down, a couple of them, sold some of the material locally, but then needed to sell a truckload of material to get a bobcat or skid steer or whatever. And John, at that time, you're the one that gave me a deposit, a $10,000 deposit to do that. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, I do remember that very clearly.
So at 18 years old, could you imagine getting a $10,000 check in your hands? I was on kind of cloud nine, It kind of helped me become who I am today. I mean, it really did that. Not too many people would do that from, 15 states away, Missoula, Montana. Superior Hardwoods sending an 18-year-old kid deposit check on some reclaimed lumber. But for one reason or the other, you did it, and I think you came out all right with that deal.
Well, you helped us out greatly because we had a lot of architects at that time that were designing, homes, Montana lodges with hand-hewn timbers, hand-hewn siding, antique flooring was, growing
at that time, what did the market actually look like? Like, for me, back in the day, I grew up with my father, tearing down old buildings, old barns, old log cabins, and just scrapping it and salvaging it out. But for you, you were actually doing something with it. You're doing these log homes, these retreats or whatever. But the market is a little bit different today than it was back then. But what is the difference between back then and now in the reclaim market?
That many years ago, there wasn't as many people involved in dismantling, taking down antique lumber. There was just a handful of people. And one of the main issues with a lot of it is who could you trust? Because there was a lot of carpetbaggers in the old wood game that you'd send them money and
They
never got any
disappeared.
wood.
Yeah.
People at that time, there was no grading system. You bought and a semi-load of reclaimed barnwood, and how much of it did you end up throwing away was always a question mark.
Yeah, the early beginnings like that, there was no grade. You expected to pay for, 500 feet of barnwood, usable barnwood. You expected to get 500 feet of usable barnwood, but fact of the matter is if the board was polluted with oil or something that was in the barn or paint or excessive nails, really it had no use.
No, yeah, you couldn't use it.
I think back then is when the market was what it was. I mean, it was the beginning stages in Montana of using recycled lumber is when it started in the 90s. It was not popular in the 90s, and at least that's what I don't remember, that it was popular in the 90s. But as the years go by, it's reclaim still seems like it's trending up. When you pick up the magazines these days and you go through them, and like I told you, was it this morning or last night, every magazine I picked up from the West was reclaimed wood. Every house had reclaimed wood in it. And it's puzzling to me because, old wood, we're known for flooring. We're not really known for timbers, even though that's, part of the reclaim business. But when you pick those magazines up, there's all kinds of reclaimed lumber. If it's not the house that's built out of reclaimed wood, it's a table or if it's an accent wall in the house in the magazine that has reclaimed in it. But I do remember looking through that magazine. Every single picture had a piece of reclaimed wood in it, it's crazy to me because back then, I don't remember that. So in my perspective of it, the reclaim market has grown since the 90s.
I think tremendously. I first started dealing in reclaim probably in the late 80s. And the only thing I was dealing with at that time was antique heart pine flooring, some chestnut, and those were things being put in Big Sky, Montana homes. At that time, I don't recall any timbers being used.
Mostly rounds, logs.
Yeah, log homes were probably a lot more built architecturally, and Montana did have, probably 30 log home builders at one time.
Wow, no kidding.
And then I think, as you said, in the 90s, people discovered, beams, hand-hewn timbers. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, architects started designing those into the homes as accents or part of a timber frame package.
So the market in general, I mean, we were talking about, the mid 90s to where it's at now, where it wasn't hugely popular back then. At least I didn't think it was. And considering where it's at now, all the photos and everything that you see in the magazines. Now in Montana, with building all those homes, John, how many of the houses that you see or you supply to, have reclaimed wood in them.
The lodge type home being built usually always has reclaimed lumber in it.
But not just, it's safe to say, not just in Montana. I mean, Texas, Colorado,
Oh, yeah.
Wyoming.
Idaho, we've sold stuff in Colorado, Washington, Oregon.
You know, I felt that it was important to get on and educate people about reclaimed lumber. And for those people that may or may not listen to this, but may listen to it, what do you consider yourself a pioneer in the reclaim business, educated individual with historic materials?
I've got my education on being maybe considered an expert today.
Yeah.
You know, I paid for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, made many mistakes along the way, believed in people that I probably shouldn't have believed in.
Give me a couple examples of what you mean by like a mistake in the reclaim business. You know, because I think that's our biggest problem too. Is there is a tremendous amount of mistakes and misrepresentations and stuff like that. But you know, you're a little bit, you know, Superior Hardwoods in Montana. You guys are a little bit different than Oldwood. That we're both into the, you know, the antique reclaim business. But give me a few examples of mistakes that, you know, you've made maybe along the way. And I know that you said earlier that your factory burnt down in 85 or 95. And that didn't have anything to do with reclaimed wood, right?
No,
Okay. All right. So,
it actually saved me.
yeah.
You know, because I was just in the process of getting into it by buying that salvage out of Lolo, Montana. And that actually was the only thing that didn't burn because it was outside.
No kidding.
And it did have some incredible ponderosa pine in it. It was built in the 18s, around the 1920s. But, you know, as mistakes is, I think in the industry, people in the beginning or pioneer stage was easily overselling product. Oh, this is the best stuff you've ever seen, John. It's just beautiful. And then you buy it and get it in and go, oh, wow, I'm throwing 30% of this away. It isn't as nice as he made it sound it was.
Right.
And I think a lot of, you know, I don't know if these guys were desperate.
So what does that mean, though? So to somebody that doesn't know a whole lot about reclaimed, so when you say you got to throw 30% of it away, how does that impact you as a buyer of reclaimed lumber?
Well, all of a sudden, what I thought I was paying for it ended up costing me this amount.
So if you bought a load of wood, you know, rough barn wood out of a barn from some picker guy back east, and you gave him $20,000 for the trailer load or whatever, you know, it was by the board foot, and you lost 30%. So technically, you lost $6,000 on that load. Not to mention the freight from the east to the west that you've lost too, right?
Correct. You know, you're hauling firewood across the United States at, you know, 300 1,000.
Yeah, man, that's expensive, and I'm sure that wasn't built into your bottom line when you go to sell this stuff.
Not at all. I mean, it was a learning experience that, like you say, if you bought $20,000 for a truckload, okay, it costs $2 a foot. Okay, you throw 30% away plus your shipping. All of a sudden, you're into it for over $3 a foot.
And that's where it gets really.
And then you might have been trying to sell it for $3.50 a foot, and you go, "Oops, didn't make as much money as I thought it was."
Yeah, no, you lost money at that point. Yeah.
Yep.
I think that was, you know, me being the vendor, and not, you know, I was on the opposite end. You know, you were the buyer.
Correct.
I was the seller back then in the 90s, and you know, from a vendor's point of view, I was out young age tearing down a barn. I looked at it as, wow, look at all this barnwood in this barn. I tore it apart. I didn't know anything about saving the board the right way. We were just grabbing the stuff out of there, throwing it in a pack and shipping it and calling up, and 20% waste, 30% waste. You know, I was that vendor doing that, you know, and there's no grading guidelines back then. There's no process back then. But to my point, I mean, the startup people in the reclaim business that dismantle old structures and resell it, is it safe to say that they have a big education in this business if they want to be successful in it?
A big education. I mean, how do you tear it down? How do you utilize the product to the best ability?
How do you separate species?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of guys, there's, oh, it's all oak. Well, then, you know, I've gotten loads that say, oh, it's mainly oak. And you get it and you go, it's not oak.
Right.
It's elm, it's beech, it's, you know, not a species that they could identify.
Yeah. And at that point, you give in the guy a deposit. And what do? I mean, you wanted oak. You got elm, beech, ash, whatever that came out of the barn. And you gave him 10 grand. Basically, you're held hostage because he ain't going to give you $10,000 back.
No, and you're not going to send.
So you have
send
to
it
buy
back
something
either.
that you didn't want.
Yep.
So that's another expense in the reclaim business that most people don't realize, because it's just not a shelf product to where you can pick the phone up and call somebody and order exactly what you want. When you're a manufacturer trying to buy the rough products, it's not that easy.
No, it's very difficult. And then you get a job, and you go, okay, this guy wants, I want this many 8x8s 10 foot long. I want this many 8x8s 20 feet long, and I need this many 10x10s 14 feet long. And you know, just got the truckload hoping that all this would be on there, and it's not all on there.
Yeah.
The specifications that a builder may want.
And just mysteriously, your 12x12s turned into 9x9s and 8x8s for some reason when it got shipped out.
Could be. It's all depends on how somebody tallies, you know, with the ruler.
Right.
You know, how can you tally these as 10x10s when they're only 8 3/4 by 8 3/4?
Yeah, huge problem in the reclaim business.
And that it is in the industry how somebody tallies. But you know, we, at least over the years of getting experience, we'll tally the lumber this way, and we'll inform to the barn guy that we're buying from, okay, if it's over 9.5, we'll consider it's a 10x10. But if it's under 9.5, it's a 9x9.
Right.
So we're at least on the same playing level when it comes to inventorying the material.
Now, when you inventory your timbers, do you inventory them by the inch or do you inventory them by the foot?
By the foot.
By the foot. So pretty much the same thing we do here at Old Wood Limited. We inventory it by the foot. It gets too complicated when you inventory things by the inches. Mm-hmm. And, you know, just to calculate the footages on it. And also, too, when we don't buy material on the inch. We go to the foot. So if one timber that a vendor may bring in, it might be 8.5 foot long, and the next timber is, you know, 9 1/4. We would call one a 9, and we'd call them both 9s, and then the next timber we call an 8. So it's kind of like a give and take situation. Is how we do it at Old Wood, because we cut flooring, right? So a lot of times, you know, we'll take that timber and we cut it up, and we could get an 8.5 foot board out of it, but it's reclaimed wood, so we're faced with all kinds of defects. So usually an 8-foot timber gets turned into 4/4 boards and then gets defected into smaller pieces so that you don't have open peg holes and knots. But back to the vendor side of things, you know, buying reclaimed wood, with the growing demand in the market for reclaimed wood, I think personally, has gotten to be even more and more complicated over the years, because there's always new guys jumping into business, and there's always somebody that can sell it cheaper. What's your opinion on, you know, say a new guy in your area starts up, buys some lumber from back east, and he wants to get into the building market in your neck of the area? I mean, what's the challenges that you're faced with somebody like that?
The challenge is the pricing aspect of it. They'll come in and they don't, you know, perhaps have quite the overhead, and they'll sell it at a less price than we would sell it for. And
But they don't have the experience that you do in the business, and they don't have the grading and the, you know, all the processes that you do to it before you ship it.
they don't. And this has happened many times where, we lost the order, but the customer came back to us because they didn't have enough, and or it wasn't up to their standards. We have standards, and we like to let everybody know when they buy a product from us, 100% of it's usable.
So you do consider your product 100% usable when
Correct.
you ship it out. Yeah.
Where
That's good.
competitors, their price is less money for a reason.
Yeah, we often, a lot of times, see that too, where people come in and $2 or $3 a board foot cheaper and square foot cheaper, board foot cheaper, whatever, and you scratch your head and you go, how can they do that? How can they come in at that price? And you always want to follow back up on a job. If you don't get it and they buy off of that cheaper person, what's the product really like? Is it really oak? Is it really what the customer asked for? And a lot of times it's not. And there's big problems when people, designers, builders, and architects spec a certain color of a timber, a species of a timber, and they get it and it's not the right thing. And that's why, at Oldwood, we try to put grade marks on it. We create the standards, and just like you do at Superior Hardwoods. You've created a standard. So when you sell that product to your customer, if it's a certain color, or length, or width, or species, that it is what they asked for. But in most cases, when a new guy comes into it, they don't understand that part of it. They just think that they're selling timbers, and then it creates a mess on the building end of the project. And when that happens, then we look really good at our price that is a little bit higher because we actually know what we're doing in the market. Is that a fair statement to say with some of these new guys coming into the marketplace?
Excellent statement, because I think you and I talked about this before. I lost a job to a good client on an antique oak job, and he said, God, John, these guys are $3 less than you, or $2 less. I can't remember exactly. And lost the order. And 6 months later, I ran into him and I said, how'd your job go on that antique oak? And he said, wasn't good. I had 35% waste. And then I was at least able to say, well, then it made my price look pretty good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So those are the things that happen.
I'm more of an encourager in the reclaimed industry in my area for the startup companies. I love to educate if I have time to educate, but there's a lot of startup companies back here where the resource is, not in Montana but in Ohio, where Oldwood's at, that these people want to tear down a barn and then retail everything out of that barn and have no clue what they're doing. None. And then all of a sudden, we're faced with a guy that's got a barn beam or a board that's trying to sell it at a retail level that has not been kill dried, that has not had bug sprayed, has not been checked for quality, the species, the color, everything. But they seemed like they jumped from A to Z in 10 seconds because most people say, oh, look, these people are getting $1,000 for a timber. My barn's worth whatever, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, when that's not the case most of the time. And so what we like to do is when we do see the new vendors, we have our lumber buyer grader. Like before they bring anything in, we go over a grade spec sheet that we've created on how we want it. And if they bring it in and it's not to that grade spec sheet, then we educate them or we reject the load. Because we want to encourage people to recycle these old buildings, and we want to be the company to buy from them, just like you want to be the company to buy from them on some aspects of it. But it's always a battle, you know. They don't want to be the vendor that jumped into it wants to automatically do what you do, you know, and you got 35 years experience doing it. And it kind of disrupts the marketplace a little bit, causes confusion. And until the end user understands the product, we could lose some sales over it. We couldn't lose some sales over it, but we also look good because they did that, you know, because they bought just random wood out of a barn for a multi-million-dollar project. They'll think twice before they do that again and come back to people that actually put a service into it, you know, by processing it, defecting it, grading it, and getting exactly what the end user wants. But to your market out in Montana with all the log homes, we don't have that market here in Ohio. So our market in Ohio is hardwood floors, trim. You know, we sell fireplace mantles, very few beams. But for your market out in Montana, it seems like certain places out there, there's, you know, 30 different people doing it. So it's disruptive when I see that, because those guys really have a long education on what they're doing, and they're competing in the marketplace that I think you started back in the 90s. There was nobody in Montana doing it, and that I knew of, and you were the first one there. Now you got all these guys that's doing it, or trying to do it, I should say, that are lined up. How are you beating them at their own game? How are you being different? How are you educating the builder, architect, designer, homeowner, check writer that, you know, when you do have competition in your market like that, what are you doing to you know, help them understand that your product is better and it's worth a little bit more money, or whatever you did to it, because everything that you do to it adds a value.
Well, our process is, if it's timbers coming in from a barn, is we automatically clean all visible metal. We pressure wash it, you know, properly stack it. You know, the issue is, I mean, we built quite a large inventory over the years, and that's probably, you know, some of the key to our success, because somebody orders product, usually we have enough timbers to fill the bill. Right. And we're not out chasing it and buying it. We're buying stuff to have available, so the builders can just come down to the store, give me a sheet of paper, and we go, yep, we can do it. I typically won't quote on a job that I don't have the timbers for, because first, I don't know if I can get them if there's some particular size.
Does that happen a lot?
On occasion, it does. You know, unfortunately, you have people that demand hand-hewn timbers larger than they come. And that, in this, you know, business, you and I both know that 8x8s, 10x10s, 10x12s, 10x12s, 10x13s, 10x14s start getting rare. There's not many pieces that get, you know, bigger than 12x14s. They're out there, a few, but, you know, if you have a house that has a large amount on them, it can become difficult to obtain.
Not to change the subject, but talking about big timbers, do you still have the massive hand-hewn timbers in your yard that I seen years ago?
I do. From the St. Lawrence Seaway.
Yeah, what size of timbers are those?
They're 23 by 23, white oak, 50 foot long. There's some 16 by 18s, 30 foot long.
That is incredible.
You know, I have probably about 10,000 feet that was found that they believe sank sometime in the late 1700s. Mm-hmm. And they were hand hewn, actually sawed down, cut down, and hewn in the forest, and then somehow, you know, transported down the St. Lawrence Seaway.
So they were floated down the river.
probably, or on a raft,
Yeah.
one or the other.
I remember several years ago when I went to your yard and seen those timbers. I mean, I couldn't believe how big, how massive, how historic they were. They were, for me, being having passion for old lumber and old things. They're huge trophy. I mean, ginormous trophy. And to this day, this is Oldwood's 23rd year of being in business and the reclaim business. To this day, I've never in my life seen hand-hewn white oak timbers 23 by 23, 50 foot long. They're museum pieces to me, literally. A value on those are, there's really no value to them. I mean, you couldn't put a value on them, is what I'm saying. It's
They're historical.
yeah. There's no way to replicate them, to find another match. They're just unique pieces. So, John, being a pioneer and expert in the reclaimed wood business, what kind of advice could you give a young entrepreneur starting up in the reclaimed business? What kind of advice could you give him today if you were to meet somebody going into the business?
Well, I think the most important would be is go see your vendor, be able to see what he's doing, what kind of projects he's tearing down, and put eyes on the material would be most important. I couldn't at all times, and it cost me a lot of money.
Yeah.
And that would probably be a pretty good beginning, that you knew what you were going to get, and you had your eyes on it.
Right. Yeah, and I think here at Oldwood too, that would be our biggest thing with a new startup vendor or somebody that wanted to get into the industry that we could potentially buy raw products from, is to educate them a little bit, because if you educate them, then there's a good possibility that they could bring you the material that you need, because the resource that we have right now is limited. And we've been doing this pretty hard for 23 years. You've been doing it hard for 30 plus years. We're going to run out of barns. We're going to run out of these old buildings. It's going to happen. Will it happen in our lifetime? I don't know. But the more people the bigger demand for the product, and the more people that get into it, and if we can get those individuals working with us instead of against us, I think we could build a better business. And who knows what the future holds. But reclaimed wood is definitely a passion of Superior Hardwoods and Oldwoods, I can see. And your son, Corey, he's stepping in. John, you're 43 years old young, and your son's moving in. But no, I'm just playing. But your kid's moving into your spot, I see, from a guy 1,500 miles away. And that's got to be exciting for you too, to see somebody else with a passion that you have. I see it in him. I see a young John in him. And we got to make sure that without vendors, without people dismantling these barns, then what we started with, we wouldn't have it, because we got to have a resource. We got to get the material. But for your son moving into the reclaimed industry, how does that make you feel? Is that?
I'm very proud of him. I'm blessed that he's got the passion to come to work for his dad. And I don't truthfully have a great succession plan.
Yeah.
Corey is my succession plan to take over, and again, he's doing a very good job, and I'd like to fish a little bit more.
I agree. I'm with you.
Hike a little more.
Maybe maybe one day I'll come out on the Lewis and Clark and we'll go fishing together. So appreciate it, Johnny. Glad you can come to Ohio to the grand opening of the new design center at Oldwood Limited, and we hope for many years of success in the industry, and hopefully we can get you back on and we can talk more about the reclaim business.
Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest, or visit www.oldwoodltd.com.